When kids just won't listen, parents often feel stuck between two choices: to give in or get angry. It's exhausting. We give you the top techniques directly from the experts, helping you on your path to a more peaceful, respectful, and joyful life with your kids. Beril Ozay. She is a child life specialist and she's a recreational therapist. And she's another one of these people who understands the importance of play in child development. Today, Beril is telling stories about her work as an infant and toddler development specialist and managing behavioral issues with teenagers. She also shares her knowledge on utilizing community and social resources for parents who seek to educate themselves about strategies and engaging in self-development activities. Beril's a lot of fun. She's very animated and passionate in imparting her expertise, as you will hear on this show. Let's get started. Beril Ozay, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
This is my second welcome to the show because of a recording difficulties. So I'll ask you again, what is it that you love about working with kids?
Okay, so I love many things about working with kids, but I think my favorite thing is how it's kind of like a puzzle or a game to try to figure out how to approach each child to get them to, to build rapport with them in the quickest and most efficient way, because of the settings that I work in, whether that's in physical rehab or in the psych unit. I have to do that quickly because they're not with me for a really long time. And some kids are ready to just be silly and open up right away, but a lot of them take a lot longer. And I have to really kind of go back to those child development basics and think about where they are and read their cues, and kind of try, all the tricks I have in my toolbox. And when those kids and I have a connection or when they have a success, it feels extra rewarding. And I really love seeing that theory in action and watching them gain new skills and feel proud of themselves about it. And, and when we practice something and they do it successfully, they'll come up to me and be like, "Oh, Miss Beril, remember we did this and I tried it and it worked," and that's probably one of the most rewarding things.
Yeah. That's nice. And in your capacity as a child life specialist and the other hats that you've worn and other places where you've worked, what would you say is the main thing that you've learned about kids as you work with them?
So, I see this a lot. I've been seeing this a lot on social media, and I love that it's gaining traction. But the main thing that I've learned is when kids know better, they do better. And this is true for most kids. So even if it feels like you've told a child something dozens of times and you're still like, wow, like, why are you doing this? I think a lot of people, not just parents, but teachers or, caregivers, they get frustrated, but we have to remember that most people, but especially children, learn experientially. So that means by doing, and children learn through play, and I think that's the thing that, I have learned and that I try to remind people of is when they know better, they do better and they need practice, because they're not going to get it right away.
Right. So when people are saying, a frustrated parent is saying, "Hey, this kid knows better, but still isn't doing it," your point is that to know something, the kid needs to have real experience and practice with it, and
Right.
and maybe have even played it out or in some way incorporated
Exactly.
play. Uh huh.
Yes, yes. So I love that you say played it out, but so aside from being a child life specialist, I'm also a recreational therapist. And the whole concept of recreational therapy is that, we learn by doing and by action. And you may have told a child a specific thing, or, you tell them, hey, don't touch this, it'll hurt, right? Like going, way back to basics of safety here for younger children. Um, but that's what they're supposed to do, right? So we want to keep them safe, but we have to kind of navigate those risks as what's going to help them learn and how much harm is it really going to do, right? So if we have a cactus plant, for example, and this is a personal story from my mother, um, she told me several times not to touch it, not to touch it. And what did I do? I palmed it,
Yeah.
right? So did I do it again? No. Um,
Right.
but kind of like generalizing that.
Yeah. So you're calling that like kind of a learning versus harm continuum,
Mhm.
or a balance there.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I like to talk about that too, where there's risk in everything. Like
Hmm.
everything comes with a downside. Everything comes with a cost. Everything has a risk, and there's a risk to letting them climb the tree, and there's a risk to letting them sit on the couch. Like
Right.
there's cost to both of those. You can't eliminate risk in your life, and um, yeah, I think that's definitely where growth and learning comes from, is when we allow ourselves and allow our kids to fail without falling too far from the tree.
Right. Right. And exactly. And, I think that many people want to, you know, protect their child from failure, but that's such a disservice to your child's development. And also they have to learn natural consequences, so going with kind of that, one of the things that I've learned, there is, I don't know if you're familiar with Love and Logic. Have you heard of Love and
Yes,
Logic?
parenting
Yeah.
with love and logic.
Yes.
Indeed I am familiar. Hmm.
Yes. So, in one of the nonprofits that I worked at, we used that as a kind of a guiding principle. And one of the things that is mentioned in there is natural consequences. And so, for example, if your 7-year-old doesn't want to wear a coat and it's, below freezing outside, you kind of assess the situation and you either allow them to go outside and see how cold it really is, and if they're throwing a fit still, just okay, then you have to kind of assess, like, will they get pneumonia from here to the car, you know? And, bring that coat, of course. Or if all else fails and you really don't feel comfortable with it, then offer a choice, and we do that a lot in child life, as you know. So it's not whether, do you want to wear a coat? It's okay. Do you want to wear your pink coat or your black coat,
Right. Yeah. So, recreational therapist, child life specialist, and you also mentioned working in a psychiatric, some capacity with
Yes.
psychiatric. Is that right?
Yep. So I am currently working on a crisis stabilization unit for adolescents. And
Can you
they
just
are,
describe what that looks like, and what
sure,
goes on there, and what the challenges are?
sure. So, gosh. So I'll talk about what a crisis stabilization unit is, first and foremost, because I think a lot of people, it sounds a lot scarier than it really is. Um, so essentially, it's a short term or acute setting where kiddos come when they are in a crisis, right? So whether that means a suicide attempt or it means really high risk behaviors. So we talked about, risk taking is healthy, but when we are talking about, drugs or promiscuous sexual activity, that's, dangerous and not appropriate, right? So things like that. So they come to our unit to kind of address those behaviors and see if they need to be on medication and to get their meds stabilized, their behavior stabilized, and then go to a more long term facility or go back to their homes with resources and therapy in the community. So, with that being said, because they are in such a high stress situation when they come to us, most of our kiddos are, um, it tends to be one way or the other. Either they're very withdrawn, depressed, not engaged at all, or they are super impulsive, super explosive, and kind of on the two ends of the spectrum there. And I think the coolest part of that is kind of seeing those kiddos, the super withdrawn ones, to kind of you know open up and become more comfortable with the staff and the other patients, and the ones that are more explosive to kind of work on those impulses and seeing them go from maybe not being able to sit still for more than 30 seconds to where they're just jumping up and doing pacing around before they could sit back down, to being able to have a full 45-minute group therapy session with me. And that's really cool.
Yeah. So the ages, this is pretty much all teenagers you're working with
Yeah, so
in that
they're
setting.
12 to 17 is the population I currently work with.
So you've got teenagers who may have been using drugs or in a crisis situation.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, it's scary to me just to think about. I'm already scared of teenagers enough, but to imagine when they're in that situation,
Right.
and maybe because I know it so well. That's what my teenage years looked a little bit like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, I'm wondering how we get those kids to listen. So can you describe for us, um, maybe there's an event that took place there,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, and what worked well for you in that scenario?
Sure. So I will talk about a specific event that happened fairly recently. But events like this are they pretty much occur on a daily basis. With us, with in that crisis kind of a situation. But I think a lot of parents can relate to, um, they say something that feels innocent to them, or they're just asking what they feel like is a simple task, and their teenager just blows up, right?
Yeah.
So for me, the particular event is, I think it's going to sound extreme to a lot of people, but I'll talk a little bit more about it as we kind of go on. But I was in the middle of doing a group session where we were playing a game with the kids, and on that day, it just so happened that we had a lot of new admissions. So um, there were a lot more impulsive behaviors and a lot more, just symptomatic things going on, right? So they were
Right.
having a really hard time listening to directions and staying on task that particular day. And I gave them, at the beginning of each group, I set the expectations and I tell them the consequences, right? And normally they do pretty well, but that day they just were struggling. And I gave them several opportunities to correct their behavior. And the last time I said, guys, we're having a really hard time today for some reason. But if I have to tell you guys one more time to respect one another, I'm going to end group. And on our unit, when I end a group, that means they have to go to their rooms until it's time for the next group. So I had to do that because, they just could not settle down. And so I said, okay, that's fine. We're just going to end group right now, and I'll see you guys for the next group. And one of my kids, a 13-year-old, got very angry and threw a chair in my general direction, and it happened to hit me. And I didn't get hurt. It was fine. She wasn't trying to hurt me, but she started throwing several chairs, and we had a whole behavioral code, which means that all the kids have to go to their rooms and shut their doors, and staff have to get involved.
That's code whiling out, right?
Right. Yeah, in the field we call it a code green, but yeah, in layman's terms, pretty much whiling out. And so, and I could have responded angrily. I could have shamed her and lectured her about why it wasn't appropriate to throw chairs. But I didn't, because she's 13. She knows she shouldn't throw chairs, And so instead of that, I just objectively said to her, I gave the group several chances to correct their behavior. I let you guys know that group would be over if you couldn't do that. And when I followed through with those consequences, it seemed like you got very angry and you started throwing chairs. What happened? And with her, and I think many people will relate to this, the answer was, of course, I don't know. Right?
Yes.
Right.
Yes. That's a tricky one. And a lot of times in these conversations, that doesn't really come up. I think in our minds, we kind of have like, here's how the conversation is going to go. If I ask them this, they're going to say this, and it's all going to work out great.
Right.
And so a lot of times the conversation is about having this book of questions that are going to get you the answers. But it's a lot harder to talk about that teenager or other mentality of just really not giving you anything.
Right. Yeah, because they're going to say, I don't know. Which, there's a lot of reasons for that. And obviously the kids I work with very well may not know why they just started throwing chairs. But you have to kind of continue to empathize and ask those questions and kind of, so this is something that I learned in crisis counseling. And a lot of times people really don't know. The people who lack those social emotional skills really don't know. So we kind of have to assign what we think might have happened. And if you're wrong, they will tell you. And that's okay, because they see that you're trying to understand. And for the most part, and this is for adults and children, they want to be understood. They want to communicate. So to be like, hey, maybe it was because of this. What do you think? Or do you think it was because of this? And they may be like, I don't know, and that may continue. But eventually, if you're persistent, they will engage. And I can say that confidently, right? Because it's just kind of, I'm dealing with the extremes here, and and I think the other thing for anyone who works with children is to replace the word won't with can't. So we have to kind of think like, what is standing in the way of this child being able to do what they need to do? Is it that they lack the emotional skills? Are they tired? Are they hungry? Like, there's those physiological things too. Are they overwhelmed? Because I think because a lot of teenagers look like miniature adults, we forget that they're still children. Um, and and there's a whole thing. You've heard the people like, uh, I think it's Snickers that says you're not yourself when you're hungry, right? Um,
Right.
but I mean, it's so true. Like we get angry when we're hungry or when we're tired or when we're
Yeah.
expecting
So so
teenage.
in that regard, they kind of are like miniature adults in that they have there's plenty in common
Right,
to
right.
connect with.
But also, they're also like toddlers, because their brains are
Right.
developing so quickly, and there's just so much going on in their brains that they can't regulate a lot of their emotions, and that's physiological,
Yeah. Can we take it back to that when the kid says, I don't know, and they're ignoring you, and you said to continue to empathize and ask questions.
Hmm.
Um, I guess can you give us a couple more examples of what that would look like?
Sure. um okay, so I want to use another example for this. um
Yeah.
so this particular kid had autism, and he was having a really hard time. We were transitioning from one location to the other. We're going from the gym back to the unit, and he had been crying for the past hour at least. And he just had his head down and would not engage. And in that situation, a lot of times what happens is people get in the mindset of he won't listen, he won't do this, he won't do that. Again, like shifting that
Right.
paradigm of won't to can't, right? So, I got on his level, and I allowed him to keep his head down because you just have to meet them where they're at sometimes, right? So, um, and I promise I'll bring this back all the way.
Yeah. No. Go ahead.
But you have to meet kids where they're at. So with that particular kid, I said, um, "Do you want to stay in the gym?" And he didn't respond at all. Just kept his head down. And I said, "Are you overwhelmed right now?" No response. Okay. So to him, even a yes or a no was too much to ask. Um, so I said, "Okay, I want to help you. We have to find a way for us to communicate. Can you maybe do a thumbs up or a thumbs down?" Um, and to paint the scenario, like he's sitting on a chair, he has his head down, his hoodie's over his face, and his head is all the way to his knees. Okay. I mean, really closed off, right? And I said, "I really want to communicate with you. I want to help you. Can you give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down?" So he slowly raises his hand and he gives me a thumbs up. Cool. So right there, we
Yeah.
built that rapport. I've met him where he's at. I'm not asking him to look at me. I'm not asking him, anything he's not comfortable with. Right now, we have a problem to solve. We need to get you back to the unit. How do we accomplish that? Right. Um,
Yeah.
so I said earlier you were crying. Were you upset? Thumbs up. Okay. Did something happen? No response. Cool. So I take that as a no, right? So because he's consistently been giving me yes. Um, so then I said, "Do you want to go back to the unit where it's more quiet? You can go to the quiet room." No response. Okay. "Do you want to go?" It's just kind of like going back and forth.
Yeah.
And eventually I said, "Okay, so do you want to go home?" Right. And he gives me a strong thumbs up. Cool. So kid's done. He doesn't want to be here anymore. So at this point,
Right.
there's nothing that I can reason with him about as far as like the hospital, this and that. So I asked him, I said, "Okay, are you okay with me touching your shoulder to comfort you?" And he pushed his chair away from me. So he's communicating, right? Very clearly, but you just have to listen, right? So, or look, in that case, and just pay attention.
Well, yeah. It's often nonverbal.
Right, right. So he's very clearly communicating to me. So I know now this kid doesn't want to be touched. Okay, so at our hospital, and many psych units, um, eventually, if there's not compliance, then staff members have to go into the hold that they're trained to do to get the patient to where they need to go, right, for safety. I know this kid doesn't want to be touched, so boom, I have a motivation. So I tell him, hey, you know what? We don't want to touch you because you don't want to be touched, but we need to get you back to the unit safely. So can you please just stand up? So at this point, I'm done asking questions. This kid is done answering. At this point, I just need to give him concrete directions, you know? And so I just told him, these are the consequences. I need you to stand up. So he stood up. I said, okay,
Yeah.
and just kind of go from there.
In the questions you were asking him, you were asking him about his feelings and a lot of yes no questions, but you weren't asking him to like explain his feelings. Like
Right.
he's not on trial to tell you, all of the ins and outs of how he's feeling.
Right.
You're more you do want to understand what he's feeling, and then you want to problem solve.
Right. So that was like a very atypical situation, right? So, this kiddo, he's in the middle of a crisis. He's been crying for an hour. He can't explain his feelings to me, but he can't, because he doesn't, and this is for adults as well. When we're in that situation, our brain is in fight, flight, or freeze, right? We're in survival mode. We can't access the logical part of our brain. So I wouldn't dare ask him because I know he can't do it, but on top of that, he had autism, and there's a lot of atypical situations and factors in that particular scenario. But, when we bring it back to parenting and dealing with your own child that sometimes it's appropriate because the thing I hear the most, I ask my kids a lot during group, like, if you were a parent, what kind of a parent would you be? Or if you could tell your parents one thing, what would it be? And almost always they say to listen. 90% of the time, it's, I wish they would listen to me. And don't listen to argue, and don't listen to kind of be like, well, no, it's not like that. Just listen and validate,
Listen to understand.
Right, exactly. And that's a skill that many people lack. Or we just get caught up, or we have all these assumptions that we think how we think, but teenagers and children in general, but teenagers specifically, they are their own people. And I think a lot of parents don't realize the amount of stress that these kids go through every single day at school, and the societal pressures that they face with, social media and always having to be on. That is a lot of stress. And a lot of my kids tell me that, my parents don't know what it's like, or they tell me I'm too young to be stressed. And that is so invalidating. Like, can you imagine how you would feel if you were told that?
Doesn't make sense.
Right.
And the amount of stress that they deal with, we don't really understand. We can't understand. I mean, heck, even just being an infant,
right?
I mean, being born is probably pretty darn stressful, And it's like there's all these things that we just kind of overlook that as if that was just
right.
no big deal for them, or we shouldn't attend to whatever struggles they're having when they're any age.
Right. Can I give you a very short tidbit about that? At my other job, I work in physical rehab, and I work exclusively with infants to toddlers. And I often think about, they get really stressed out when you're changing their clothes and they start crying, and then, they're fighting it. And I think it's I think it's really easy for a parent to get frustrated with that, because you're like, oh my God, like, can we just get you clothes so we can go somewhere? But like, imagine being an infant, and you're just like, why are you putting these constraints on me? Like it's just confusing. And I think about that all the time about how weird it must be to experience all of these things for the first time, or um, over and over again, but you don't understand why it's happening.
Yeah. Or thinking about like how long it takes you to find, the perfect pair of jeans that's really, really
Mhm.
comfortable.
Mhm.
How many years you might spend on that, and then just like compared to what we're throwing on them.
Right.
It's just kind of like, oh, I found this. This will probably work. I mean, I'm not talking about hurting them or anything, but you
Right.
see
Right.
kids just bundled up in all this stuff, and then they're in a car seat, and then they're in this and that, and it's like, wow, I just can't even imagine, uh,
Yeah.
and not getting to really choose those things, and just like, okay, this is,
Right.
I guess I'll make this work. um, what is some of your so you work with little kids and teenagers. Do you
Mhm.
have like just some favorite resources that you recommend in general to people? Um, Whether that's, well, maybe not in general. It could be specific to the older or younger ones.
So I will speak, I guess, more generally than specific. Um, I think that a lot of people forget the amount of social resources that many communities have, because we're so used to just going to the internet for everything, which is fine. It's a great resource. But there's a lot of parenting classes and resources within the community that are often very cheap or um, free. And the benefit of that is that those parents know the rest of the resources in the community. So whether that's, like, I don't know, like $5 taekwondo classes, or whether that is like art therapy for the community or whatever. Those are things that you can go out and do, within your community. And like, public libraries are a great resource. They do a lot of programming for parents of young children, that are almost always free. And I think a lot of people forget about parks and recreation. Um, most cities. I don't want to speak too generally here because I've had the privilege of living in metropolitan areas for most of my life. But most cities or counties have a Parks and Rec department. Where they offer programming and classes and stuff like that. And that's a great place to kind of, meet other people to find resources in the community.
Yeah, yeah. So you're talking about kind of like you might not, the first place you call might not be the place, but they will know others, and they will know others. So kind
Yeah,
of the power of having those weak ties, and a big network that we can reach out to.
right. So, like, I know okay, so I'm from Raleigh, North Carolina, even though I live in Baltimore right now. And I'm more familiar with the resources in Raleigh because most of my parent friends live there. But I know that a lot of the public libraries, they do like reading groups or dance and movement groups for toddlers. And I know most of my friends who participate in things like that, get to talking to other parents, and they're like, oh, well, did you hear about this? Like, this is so cool. And like, a great example of that, which again is very specific to Raleigh, is but there's a program called Project Enlightenment, and they do like free developmental screenings, and they do parent education classes, and they do like free counseling. Um, but most communities have something similar to that, and I think that people don't utilize those as often as
Yeah.
they should. And I do want to talk about one book that I think is really cool, and you may be familiar with it. But it's called The Explosive Child by Ross W.
Hmm.
Greene.
Yep.
And I think that shifting from that paradigm of can't to won't, um, if you read this book, I think it does a really good job of painting what kind of things could be addressed when we're looking at behavioral issues. So whether that's difficulty transitioning from like video games to homework, or if it's just like your child seems to explode at everything, like why that might be. Because a lot of times anger comes from hurt, um, you know, so just kind of being aware of that and like how to practically address those things.
Okay. Yeah, that's Explosive Child is an Amazon bestseller, and it's a good book.
I would recommend it highly, along with the Parenting with Love and Logic.
All right, we will put links to those, and it's been really nice talking with you. I know we could go on and on, and I do want to hear more as you're. Before the call, we talked about kind of what's next for you. So I hope you keep me posted about your direction when it comes to working more with parents. We're in that boat together. So
Yes.
it's an interesting journey, and yeah, keep us posted with that.
Thank you. I will. I also did want to add,
Sure.
um, because so you and I talked before that we started this, that I'm not doing this to plug anything. I don't have a website. I don't have a blog. I really am truly, truly passionate about this. But I do have a Facebook page that, I'm not even going to say, oh, follow me or anything like that, but it is a really easy way to, reach out to me if
Yeah.
anybody has any questions. I would love nothing more than to talk, you know, in
Yeah.
detail about specifics and kind of problem shoot and all that kind of stuff. And it's Recreation Therapy RX.
Okay.
I literally have like 26 followers. I don't care.
I know the feeling. It's all right.
It's fine. Like people can use that. Yeah, people can use that to reach me. And I mean, there's nothing I love more than talking about this stuff. And truly, like anyone, if they have any questions, like I said, I specialize in infant to toddler development and also with behavioral issues with teenagers.
And like you were saying about kind of community resources, I'm sure if you don't know, if it's out of your area of expertise, at least you can help point them in the right direction, right?
Oh yeah, yes, for sure. I've done a lot of work with nonprofits, so community resources is my jam.
Yeah, great. Well, I've loved talking with you, Beryl, and just yeah, keep us posted on what you're doing next.
I will. Thank you, and thank you for the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you. And yeah,
Yes.
everyone who's listening, we'll see you next time. Thanks for stopping by.